Welcome to the Overview of and Considerations in Federal Stalking Cases webinar, hosted by the Stalking Resource Center of the National Center for Victims of Crime. To begin today's presentation, I would like to introduce Rebecca Drakey.
Hi, thank you so much for having us on this webinar today. We are excited to talk about the overview and considerations for federal stalking cases. Just before we begin, and I turn it over to my presenters here that are with us from the FBI, I want to just give a little bit of an overview of who we are as the Stalking Resource Center. So the Stalking Resource Center is funded under the Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women. We are a program of the National Center for Victims of Crime, and we have been funded since 2000, and we provide training and technical assistance to service providers at the local, state, and national level on all issues related to stalking. So anything from the use of technology to stalk, stalking in intimate partner cases, stalking on campus. We provide that training and technical assistance both in person, but also via phone and email. So we have a wealth of resources on our website, so I would encourage you to take a little time to look more and learn more about us today. So we have several people here, and we're very excited to get this webinar started, but just so we know who you all are who are participating live today, we'd like to just kind of ask who is participating by profession. So you'll see on your, you should see on your screen a list of professions, and we'd ask that you just click on the one that best represents your profession, and we'll give everybody a moment to kind of fill that out. Looks like we have great representation from law enforcement and from domestic violence programs. And also a few folks from students and community advocacy staff. So great, we have some diverse professions. This is helpful for us. One, our trainings are often towards multidisciplinary professionals, and really when it comes to addressing stalking cases, you need a coordinated community response, and so we're very happy to have some representation from different folks in different fields here on this webinar today. So just to repeat, this webinar will be recorded. There is the option for folks who are participating to ask questions. You can ask questions specifically of the presenters. You can also ask it of the moderators. If you have any technical assistance needs when it comes to the sound and the quality on your webinar, please feel free to chat with one of us as the presenter or the host as well. So without too much further ado, I would like to turn it over to the fine folks here that have so graciously agreed to provide this training and this material for us today. Great. So with us today, we have Supervisory Special Agent Cari Robbins. We also have Supervisory Special Agent Sabina Sauer, and we have Crime Analyst Kristen Solik, who are all here with us today. And you can read a little bit about their background and about their experience. And I will also then just turn it over to Cari to get us started.
Thank you so much. I think actually we're having some technical difficulties with the sound.
Okay, we will address that.
I'm going to provide a call-in number so people can call in over the phone if you're still having issues, and I'll provide that in the chat box.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
So good to go? All right. All right, so this is Cari. Thank you so much to Michelle Garcia, Rebecca Drakey, and the Stalking Resource Center for hosting us, and to all you folks out there for taking time out of your schedule to participate in this webinar. As you can see, we'll be covering a lot of things, but really this is designed to be a general overview. The federal system can be confusing, and we want to show you how it's organized and where stalking fits in all of this. We will explain some of the realities as well. We don't want to show you how great the federal law is and all of the resources that the FBI has without caveating that these are very challenging cases and are hard to prosecute. But we won't leave you on a down note. We are confident that with increased education and awareness, the federal law and federal system are well positioned to investigate and prosecute stalking cases. For our first polling question, besides our coworkers who we see are online, who on the webinar is representing a federal agency? And while we wait for that to be pulled, so you can see the slide depicts what we call alphabet soup. There are so many federal agencies responsible for different things, and there is whoops, sorry, hold on. Okay, I just wanted to see the poll. So with all the federal agencies responsible for different things, and there's so much overlap as well, it can be confusing. The FBI is responsible for investigating over 200 categories of federal law, and stalking falls under our purview. All right, so I see we do have a good amount of federal representation. Our next polling question is just to see of the feds what capacity it is that you represent your federal agency. And while we wait for that to populate, just in general, we're glad to see all you folks included in this conversation today. One of our goals is to stir up interest and engagement by federal agents. 100% law enforcement, awesome. Okay. So to tell you a little bit about us, Sabina, Kristen, and I are from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit 2. Unlike our depiction on the show Criminal Minds, we don't have a jet to fly all over the country to kick down doors. We are broken up into 4 units, and as you can see here, covering different subject matter. We work side by side and are co-located with agents from the ATF, U.S. Capitol Police, NCIS. We have a contract psychiatrist, and also in-house psychologists. We are a multi-agency and multidisciplinary team.
Cari, Kristen, and I all work in BAU2. This is a hybrid unit consisting of 2 centers. The Behavioral Threat Assessment Center handles cases from federal, state, and local agencies. These cases consist of persons of concern and communications of concern. Stalking matters would typically come to the BTAC. The Cyber Behavioral Analysis Center primarily handles federal cases examining cyber threats and offenders and the use of computer intrusion, malicious code, and offenders engaging in cyber warfare. BAU2, as with all of the BAUs, is comprised of agents and analysts. Cari and Kristen work on the BTAC side, and I work on the CBAC side. The overlap within our hybrid unit is seen most often with stalking cases. The mission of the BAUs is threefold. First and foremost, we conduct case consultations for federal, state, and local agencies. These consultations consist of personality profiles, investigative strategies, prosecutive strategies, and threat assessments, just to name a few. We conduct training and research. Everyone in the BAUs has an area of concentration. Cari, Kristen, and I focus on stalking. This is a very simplified representation of the FBI organization. For those who are not familiar with how we are structured, this gives you a visual understanding of what makes up the FBI. There are 56 field offices across the country that investigate federal crimes. We have 64 legal attachés around the globe responsible for liaison efforts and engagement with law enforcement within the host country. One of headquarters' main functions is to support the field offices with their investigation. BAU falls under headquarters. We are a support entity and a resource for the field offices. We also have BAU coordinators in all 56 field offices who act as the liaison between federal, state, and local agencies and the FBI. Now our next poll question, has anyone ever worked with the FBI on a stalking case? And while you're polling, let's look at what makes up a field office. Each field office is responsible for investigating crimes of counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal matters, and cyber matters. Just within criminal, there are different crime problems investigated. Depending on the size of the field office, these crimes may be worked by different squads, or one squad may handle all criminal violations. At the Washington field office, where I was assigned prior to joining BAU, there's an entire branch dedicated to white-collar crimes consisting of 8 squads. Typically, stalking cases would fall to a violent crime squad. Do we ever poll?
No.
No.
But I think you can raise hands.
Has anyone raised a hand?
No.
If you'd like to raise your hand, there's a hand icon at the top of the screen. It looks like a little person with the raised hand, and you can raise your hand by selecting that.
Okay. All right, think about it. If you did work with the FBI on a stalking case, and if you can hit the raise your hand button, and if not, we'll give you a second and move on.
I think we found some, right?
Well, we're glad to see that there are people out there that have brought cases of stalking matters to the FBI. We, the FBI, investigate federal cases, and for those of you who don't know, there is a completely separate federal system for these cases. We present our cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The cases are assigned to the appropriate district court to be heard by federal judges. Should an offender be found guilty, they go to federal prison, and if they are given probation or are paroled, there is a separate federal office for that. Okay, now on to the dry stuff. This is the federal stalking statute, which I've restated in part, as you can see. There are two ways to be charged under 2261A. This is the first. The basic gist of this part is that the subject has to travel between states or internationally to stalk a person. Basically, there are several elements that must be established. 1, the defendant traveled. 2, that they had the requisite intent. 3, they engaged in a course of conduct which, 4, had an impact upon the victim. The law was recently amended in 2013. We've highlighted some of the additional language and changes that were made for you. This is the second prong of the statute. The elements we need to establish are 1, the subject has the requisite intent. 2, they use the facilities of interstate commerce, i.e. the phones, email, and mail. To 3, engage in a course of conduct which 4, had an impact upon the victim. So this circle shows, again, some of the added cyber language from the 2013 amendment. Some of the language was also taken out. Prior to the 2013 amendment, this prong of the statute required the subject and the victim be in different states at the time the course of conduct was occurring. The 2013 change seemingly removed this requirement. We are currently unaware of any case which has been prosecuted in light of the removal of this interstate nexus, and we'd be very interested in hearing from any of you if you currently have such a case or if you are involved in such a case in the future. So to demonstrate how this law can be applied, here's case example number 1. This was an actual case brought to the FBI in 2006. At the time, the victim was a male in his early 70s, and the defendant was a 63-year-old female. What is interesting in a stalking case that spanned 3 decades is that it touched upon some historical events and technological advances through the years. So the case began in 1985 when the victim placed a dating ad in the New Yorker magazine. Remember, this is before eHarmony and Match.com. The defendant responded, and they dated for approximately 6 months until the victim ended the relationship. They had planned a trip to Africa, but after the breakup, the victim took his daughter from a previous marriage on the trip. When he returned, he came home to the defendant locked inside of his apartment, where she had taken a knife to all the artwork he had shipped from his trip. The subject was taken into custody by police, but sent to a mental hospital, and no criminal charges were pursued. When the subject got out of the hospital, she began writing letters to the victim and his children. The stalking course of conduct really began in the 90s. At this time, the victim lived in New York City, and the subject lived in New Jersey. The victim received numerous calls, letters, and eventually faxes from the defendant, and not once did he communicate back. At times, the communications were threatening, and they also vacillated from seeking a relationship to insulting him. From the historical standpoint, in the early 90s, the AIDS crisis was at the forefront. The victim received a letter from the Department of Health saying that he was reported as having a communicable disease, HIV or AIDS. In a subsequent communication, the subject took credit for reporting this. Then in the 2000s, the subject started to send numerous emails, some of which were under fake email accounts. The subject received an email from a fake account which stated that the subject had committed suicide. She in fact did not, and the email was from her. She frequently traveled from New Jersey to the victim's apartment in New York City, and fortunately the doorman of the building that the victim lived in kept detailed logs of her appearances. During the anthrax scare, which happened shortly after 9/11, the victim's daughter received a letter with white powder from the subject. Unfortunately, the police, after determining that the subject was not toxic, did not investigate further. The victim, meanwhile, contacted the police on several occasions throughout this ordeal to no avail. he hired a private attorney to deal with the civil harassment lawsuits that the defendant was filing against him. Ultimately, the victim hired a private investigator. This private investigator had worked with the FBI on a previous matter and brought the case to us. So based upon these facts, both prongs of 2261A were applicable. The subject was arrested in 2007 for violating the stalking statute, which was, the subject was arrested in 2007 for violating the stalking statute, which was, interestingly, the first time the statute was used in this district. Considering the statute was enacted in 1996, it demonstrates how rarely it is really used. The judge seemingly did not understand the seriousness of this crime and was evidenced at sentencing, which was evident at arraignment. When he conveyed to the defendant, just encouraged her to get mental health assistance. Ultimately, the subject pled guilty almost a year later. By that time, the judge was up to speed on the law, and after dealing with the case over the course of the year, really grasped what an impact this crime had upon the victim. He sentenced the defendant to 18 months in prison, followed by the maximum supervised release. The judge also repeatedly denied her many motions for early release. In 2012, while the subject was still on probation, she sent a communication to the victim and unfortunately was not charged with a probation violation. Okay, so the federal stalking law is what brings us here today. But for your consideration, depending upon the facts of your case, here are some other statutes that may apply. For example, 2261, the interstate domestic violence. Per the U.S. Attorney's Office manual, the elements to prove are 1, the victim must be a spouse or intimate partner, 2, the subject must have crossed state lines with the intent to injure, harass, or intimidate, and a defense under this law would be if the subject did not contemplate criminal activity at the time the state line was crossed, and the third element to prove is that the defendant committed an act of violence, and as a result, there was bodily injury. Further, in another statute, if you have a case where you did obtain an order of protection from your jurisdiction, know that the federal law honors and enforces that order even if you move to another state. These statutes above, they apply to direct and imminent threats using, for example, the telephone, email, and mail. So this is a really wordy statute, which I've stated merely in part, but this statute is a great tool and also rarely used. It's a misdemeanor. It applies to a subject who uses a telephone or telecommunications device to threaten, abuse, annoy, and harass. Unlike 875C, which I showed you earlier, an overt threat isn't necessary because it applies to harassing and annoying behavior as well.
In addition to the federal statutes Cari spoke about, we are seeing more and more stalking cases apply federal cyber statutes to the stalking crime problem. The most common cyber statute we are seeing is 18 U.S.C. 1030, which is essentially the unauthorized access to a protected computer. For example, a couple breaks up and the ex-boyfriend, knowing his ex-girlfriend's username, is able to guess her password to her email account. He gains access to her emails and then may be able to gain access to other online accounts she may have. In this case example, we are going to highlight the use of the federal cyber statutes to address stalking. This is an actual case that came into one of our field offices, and they reached out to BAU for assistance with an unknown offender. Because the offender was unknown, we looked to the victim and her victimology. What did we know about her? At the time, she was 18 years old, attending a local community college, living at home with her parents, and participating in beauty pageants. She had gained some notoriety through these pageants in her local community. One evening, she received notification that an unknown computer logged into her Facebook account. About an hour later, she received notification that the passwords to her Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts had been changed. About a half hour after that, she received an email from an email address she didn't recognize, taking credit for changing her passwords and demanding she send good quality photos of herself to the offender along with other demands. Through a subsequent interview with federal agents, it was learned that the light on her webcam attached to her computer would turn on and off by itself. The emails continued and became more demanding and threatening in nature. He demanded that she take videos of herself and send them to him. He tried to coerce her into using Skype. The emails from the offenders suggested he was monitoring her online activity. The tone of the emails was becoming more and more angry and desperate. he attempted to extort her by threatening to post photos of her he claimed to have if she did not comply with his demands. The BAU was asked to put together an unknown offender profile. What you see on the screen is from our technical assessment of the offender's online sophistication. In our profile, we suggested that the offender had low to moderate technical ability based on his use of readily available tools found on the internet, among other things. The important takeaway here is that the offender was not very technical, yet through internet searches, he was able to learn how to use tools that granted him access to the victim's computer. Through the investigation, the offender was identified and arrested. It turned out that the offender and victim attended the same high school and lived in the same town. This is a great example to illustrate how the federal cyber statute can be applied to stalking cases. So why is it important to have federal engagement on stalking matters? Well, a recent survey on stalking found that 7.5 million people are stalked in a given year. This is an astronomical number and a significant crime problem. Stalking touches everyone. Society is much more transient nowadays. People don't live in the same communities all their lives as they once did. People move around for their jobs, to attend school, and because of this, we are seeing more stalking cases that could be handled through the federal system. As you've seen, the FBI works many different crime problems. Through research on other types of crimes, we are seeing stalking behaviors, and we are exploring this connection. And I'll discuss the next two bullets in the next two slides. So let's look at college campuses. College campuses have a large group of potential stalking victims. Who makes up the student population? Students come from out of state to attend college. Internships are becoming a requirement for graduation and may take students to another city or another state. Also, students have access to study abroad programs. The importance of addressing the prevalence of stalking on college campuses is reflected in the changes to the Cari Act of 2013. Now there is mandatory reporting requirements to include reports of stalking. Colleges are required to come up with policies and procedures for addressing these issues and responsible for creating programs that promote awareness and prevention. Something you may not be aware of, each FBI field office has a campus liaison agent who is able to assist college campuses with these and other issues. Increasingly, our lives are tied to the internet. We pay our bills online, conduct research on things that interest us, get our news, and develop friends. It's not so strange today to have people we meet online develop a friendship and have never met in person. This is one of the reasons why the BTAC and CBAC are the perfect combo to address this issue. Stalking is now borderless. The internet has made it very easy to communicate with someone next door, in the next town, or across the globe. Federal engagement is important because the federal stalking statute may be applicable to stalking cases that arise out of this.
So there are a lot of good things about the stalking statute. Compared to many state statutes in which the entire course of conduct would fall into only one count, here a person who traveled interstate and also used the facilities of interstate commerce to stalk can be charged under separate counts. Another difference from many state statutes is that this is a felony. There is no misdemeanor. An example of how this benefited a case was in a situation where a victim who was living in New York was being stalked by someone in California. The level of conduct rose only to a misdemeanor under both laws of both states. New York could not extradite the subject under a misdemeanor, and California couldn't justify bringing the victim in for the necessary proceedings on a mere misdemeanor. So for 2.5 years, the victim suffered with seemingly no recourse. The case did make its way to the FBI, and the federal law did apply. The subject was charged, arrested in California, and extradited to New York, where he was successfully prosecuted. Also, many state statutes require that the victim be in fear of death or bodily harm. The federal statute requires at the minimum that the defendant's actions would be expected to cause substantial emotional distress, essentially a much lower standard.
Okay, we'd like to point out some of the strengths of working with the FBI on stalking cases. Because we have offices across the country, the FBI can assist with interstate stalking investigations by conducting interviews and, if needed, arrests. Each field office also contains task forces, which are made up of state and local law enforcement agencies, so we can leverage those resources within the jurisdictions as well. In addition, as mentioned earlier, we have legal attachés, or legates, located in over 60 countries, and they function as liaisons between the FBI and foreign law enforcement agencies. As an example, we were involved in a case where the victim, who lived here in the States, was being stalked by a subject located in another country. The FBI agents in the U.S. reached out to our legate located in the subject's home country. They worked in conjunction with the host country's law enforcement agency, who then charged the subject with stalking. Another main strength of working with the FBI is our various resources. As Sabina described in the second case example, the CBAC was able to offer their cyber forensic capabilities by weighing in on the subject's technical knowledge. For you victim advocates listening in, the FBI has its own network. We call them victim specialists. There is at least one in each of our field offices. And finally, we at the BAU are often called upon to offer our assessments on cases such as these. Okay, so I just mentioned some of the strengths working with the FBI, so now we'll discuss the reality of investigating these cases. First is the prioritization of this crime. To illustrate this point, here is a screenshot of a page of our website, fbi.gov. As we advertise, we have jurisdiction over violations of more than 200 categories of federal law, but you won't find stalking listed on this or any subsequent pages. Unfortunately, stalking is not listed as a priority, and so many people are unaware that we handle these cases.
Next, we will address some general challenges stalking cases face and some that are particular with the federal law. First, the general challenges. This is likely not new for all of you who have worked on these matters. Often a case's course of conduct involves actions, like emailing and telephoning, which individually are not criminal behaviors. So initially, they are often overlooked. Many stalking cases ebb and flow, meaning there are periods of time the defendant may stop. So investigators and prosecutors may be inclined to wait it out versus charging a crime. In terms of managing expectations, we find many investigators and prosecutors expect a stalking case to look a certain way, based more often than not on a movie like Fatal Attraction or on something they see on TV. So we talked earlier about some advantages with the federal statute. Here are some challenges. Regarding the language about the defendant's intent to kill, injure, or harass, what about those cases where the subject claims he did not intend to harass, but merely to seek a relationship, or in a case where the subject delusionally believes the victim is in love with him? In prosecuting these cases, some challenges have been found in determining what evidence is sufficient to establish whether the victim suffered substantial emotional distress. Also, what exactly is a sufficient amount of conduct to charge a subject? The statute defines a course of conduct as 2 or more, yet this is often deemed insufficient. 2 things not required by the statute but often deemed necessary to have are overt threats by the subject and a cease and desist type of admonishment by law enforcement prior to charging the subject. Without understanding the federal law, investigators won't know what to look for, and prosecutors won't know what they need to establish these elements. Further, if a federal prosecutor is declining to seek charges, the investigators will not be able to seek tools such as subpoenas and search warrants, which will help develop the case. For example, if you have never investigated a drug trafficking case, you may not know that a subject places traps in their cars to hide drugs. So the search warrant you obtain from the court may not have sufficient language to allow you to search, and you may not even know to look for the traps in the first place. Similarly, if you are inexperienced with stalking cases, you may not know what evidence to look for and where to find it. We often use an iceberg to illustrate a stalking case. The tip of the iceberg is just that, the overt acts that the victim sees, such as the emails and letters. The level of preoccupation and obsession is what is below the surface. So, if, for example, you have a course of conduct with only a few emails and are unable to or don't seek a search warrant for the subject's computer, you wouldn't find, for example, the file folder containing hundreds of surveillance photos that the subject is taking of the victim. This revelation certainly changes the landscape from just a few communications to a disturbing obsession.
Within the FBI, we also face challenges. We do not conduct probable cause arrests. We are not first responders and therefore do not patrol neighborhoods arresting stalkers. We are designed for more protracted, long-term investigations. Not only are we governed by the federal laws, but the FBI has internal policies that can determine what investigative techniques can be utilized during an investigation. Stalking cases are not routine for the FBI. There are no set procedures for handling them when they come in. There are various ways to contact the FBI: the Internet Crime Complaint Center, call-ins, walk-ins, and other law enforcement agencies, to name a few. Depending on how a case comes in, may determine where it ends up. For example, someone may send a case to a cyber squad because the report includes an offender who sent an email to a victim. While the case involves a computer, the cyber squad may not be the right squad to handle the stalking case. Some additional challenges within the federal system. A lot of times these cases go under-prosecuted. The federal stalking statute is still relatively new, and because it is underutilized, there is little precedence for these cases. As we have pointed out, in the FBI, we prioritize investigations. The U.S. Attorney's offices also have priorities, and stalking may be low on the list of priorities. As we've mentioned, there is a lack of education and awareness on the part of federal law enforcement and prosecutors. Similarly to the Stalking Resource Center, one of our goals is to promote education and awareness of at the federal level. And then, a number of cases have offenders. Cases involving offenders with these issues can be very challenging in the federal system.
So, since based on the comments in the chat, I think we need to start over from the beginning, so our apologies. But I'd rather everybody hear it all and be on the same page. So to start from the beginning again, we're going to ask you to be the prosecutor and ask if whether or not the interstate stalking law would apply. So if you could, just keep in mind the two ways in which one can be charged under the stalking statute. To set the scene, in 1994, Jack was a new student to a high school in Wisconsin. He was a very shy and quiet kid. Jill invited him to participate in a school play. Jack pursued a romantic relationship with Jill, but she told him she only wanted to be friends. Jack began following Jill to class, and Jill recalled one time he roughly grabbed her arm to get her attention. Jill's friends told her that Jack drew pictures of her, including one in which Jack shot himself in the head with his brains on her face. This scared Jill, and she and her parents went to the principal, who advised Jack that he was to keep away from Jill. Jack did comply with this. However, shortly after graduation, Jack began contacting Jill again. So as you see here, 1995, 1996, Jill goes away for college. Jack remains in their hometown. Jack's letters desired friendship, and he apologized for his behavior, stating that he had dyslexia and his father was rough on him. In another letter, Jack stated that he was dating a former classmate of theirs. This classmate reached out to Jill and berated her for not being a friend to him. Jill felt guilty and began to respond to Jack's letters. I had started this because years later, Jack posts scans of these letters on his website. When Jill returned home from one of the breaks, she agreed to meet with Jack for the afternoon. They went to some flea markets, but she became frightened when he drove her to an isolated field. And you will see why this is started on the next slide. So it was started because of those creepy packages. One of the packages had candlesticks that she had commented on briefly during their afternoon outing. Another package was a box full of Band-Aids, and yet another was a hairy moth covered in surgical gauze. As you can see what Jill did with that package. Interestingly, the former classmate who dated Jack later on reached back out to Jill, telling her he was obsessed. Further, this classmate had obtained a restraining order against Jack. By the end of 1998, Jill had not heard from Jack for months, so she decided just to let it go. As you can see here, for a period of years, Jill was not aware of any contact from Jack. So her life moved along. She graduated, moved to Washington, and started pursuing a career in art. She married in 2002, and the apartment building that she was living in was utilizing Friendster.com. I'm not completely familiar, but mainly it was used as a way of allowing neighbors to communicate. And in 2003, as you can see here, unfortunately, Jill received a message through that Friendster account from Jack. Shortly thereafter, she also received numerous emails from him. Jill was also very active with a local, not national, nonprofit organization, which sent out a notice to its members that they had a new member, Jack, who had joined from Wisconsin.
One day, Jill's neighbor approached her in the hall and said that they had a friend in common, Jack. Jill became alarmed and distanced herself from this neighbor. Shortly after, Jack had sent an email with photos of himself in her current neighborhood and in her building. He stated in the email it was a coincidence that he was dating someone in her building, that neighbor. Jill and her husband moved as soon as possible. So as you can see here, Jill received a call from Jack on her birthday in 2006. The phone call was from a Washington area code, which turned out to be from a payphone at a Washington bus depot. And as you can see, Jack is doing a lot of things online, many of which are indirect communications. In other words, he would post on his blog photos or comments on places that Jill and her husband were visiting. He also posted photos of himself standing in front of their house. Jill happened to see a news story about a stalking case and realized she was in a similar situation. She called a crisis hotline and began the process to obtain an order of protection. As you can see, the subject went to Jill's art show in Washington. Also, while he said he intended to follow her out to LA, he never showed up. Unfortunately, the restraining order that Jill attempted to get was denied. Jack continued to send numerous communications to Jill and also to post about Jill. At the end of 2008, Jill got into graduate school in Boston. Even before she moved, Jack sent her postcards depicting vintage Boston scenes. And I'm missing a slide. So before I get there, I'll tell you that in 2009, there's a missing slide. It's awesome. It's got a lot of graphics on it. So in 2009, several things were happening. Jack again began to send photos of places that she was going to, and also of her front door. Jill immediately contacted campus security, who put cameras outside her door and also put an alert on campus with Jack's photo. In addition, her husband's parents received strange mail at their house addressed to Jill, and Jill was also at this time attempting to remove any information of her from internet databases. She also received a package postmarked from Boston. Now, this entire time, Jack was still living in Wisconsin. So now I ask you, again, to put your prosecutor hat on and let us know if you think charges should apply. And I'll give you a second while that populates. And we know who's not voting because it shows numbers. It's closed. Okay. Of the 16, and we will ignore those who abstained, but everybody said 100% that charges should apply. And I will say I agree with you as well. Unfortunately, the actual prosecutor on this case actually said, I don't see what the crime is. And, fortunately, none of you answered no. But as we discussed, a declination by the prosecutors thwarted any further investigation that could be conducted.
All right, so what do we recommend when bringing a stalking case to the FBI? First, as I'm sure you're all aware, please document everything. That includes not only a stalking log, but a list of previous law enforcement contacts. If you've already approached a state or local law enforcement agency, it's helpful for us to have that information, including your contacts and any police reports that may have been filed. Also, for those of you listening in who function in an enforcement or victim assistance capacity, we recommend that you reach out to the local FBI office and make contact with your counterpart. And finally, if you are in an emergency situation, please call 911, even if the FBI is investigating your case, we are not first responders. Okay, so today we've discussed the strengths and challenges of the federal stalking statute. The strengths are obvious, but our goal is to overcome the challenges by bringing awareness and education to those who investigate stalking and to those who are responsible for prosecuting the offenders. We hope that we achieved that today and brought you some new information that you can apply in your specific situation. Okay, that concludes our presentation. Thank you again to the Stalking Resource Center, and thanks to all of you for sticking with us through the difficulties here with the technical aspects. But we really appreciate you allowing us to share our thoughts with you today. We're happy to answer any questions and take your comments.
Thank you all so much. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to please chat them in the Q&A box down on should be the bottom, or maybe it's moving up to the middle of your screen now. Feel free to chat your questions, and we so appreciate all of you being here with us today and sharing this great information. I learned a lot, and this was very good, despite all of the technical difficulties. So thank you so much. I see a couple of folks are typing and are chatting. But if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box.
But we won't answer them. We'll pretend the mic went out again.
Okay. Oh, and I know actually, Brianna, if we could move that Q&A box, I know people would still like the agent's contact info, so that would be very helpful. Thanks so much. Great. Well, if so folks do have the contact information for all of the presenters. If you have questions or comments after, please do feel free to reach out to them directly or reach out to the SRC, and we will make sure that you get in contact with them. Thank you all so very much, and so sorry for all the technical difficulties. This will be recorded and will be available. Bryn, do you want to let us know when you think it might be available by?
We'll have this recording to you by Friday.
That's perfect. I think, Chris, you said there may be a question. Yeah.
There's a question. It says, what additional resources can the Stalking Resource Center provide to cases of stalking?
So, so thanks so much. The Stalking Resource Center, we work with professionals that work on these cases, so victim advocates, law enforcement, prosecutors. We can provide sort of training, but we can also provide technical assistance and consultation, and we can also hopefully connect folks who, if you are in one area and would like to be connected with somebody who might have experience working these types of cases, we can certainly serve as a liaison in that fashion as well. So for any further sort of information about the SRC, please do feel free to reach out to us and check out our website, and there are several, you can get our email and phone contact via our website.
Yeah. And then there's another question, but we can't see the full question.
It says, would these FBI resources be available in relation to cross-border stalking cases? This person's based out of Calgary, Canada, and have had several cases that lead into the U.S.
Interesting. Okay, so are you talking about offenders that are based in the United States or the victims based in Canada? And we lost the question. Yeah,
Kristen,
you know what?
You
Sorry.
can type that in the chat box, Christopher, or the Q&A box. Oh,
I
it
see.
says both, actually. They've dealt with both scenarios.
Okay. Well, I mean, as explained, we do have LEGATs, or legal attachés, in Canada. And if you haven't already liaised with those folks, usually they're situated at the embassies. Mm-hmm. And we could start a dialogue on specific case information that way. Because certainly, you know, obviously local laws in Canada, I would imagine the extradition on these laws are rare if ever. But certainly we do assist in investigations of this kind.
Great, thanks so much. Are there any other questions that folks might have? Again, please do feel free to reach out to the agents directly, or do you have any list?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can't see the whole. She can expand that box.
Brian, are you able to expand the Q&A box? Oh, just,
yep. It'll cover up the box. Is that better?
I tried.
I'll read it to you. It says, I work at a prosecutor's office on misdemeanor cases and work closely with a felony prosecutor to refer cases to be charged at a higher level. We seem to be struggling with seeing more and more cases of non-intimate but scary stalking behavior. We're searching for assistance in how to do better threat assessment and be able to understand the mental health issues that exist and how we get that behavior to stop.
No, great question. And that's something we do day in and day out at the DAU. We do case consultations and provide threat assessments on cases. Generally speaking, the way we intake these matters, and if Kristen, do you want to address? Going through our DAU coordinators we talked about. So wherever you're from, whatever jurisdiction you're in, we'd recommend going to and contacting your local field office and identifying who the BAU coordinator is, or the NCABC coordinator is their former name. If you have any trouble identifying who that is, feel free to reach out to one of us. Our contact information, as you can see, is still up, and we can certainly identify who this person would be from where you're at. Oh, okay. Do you know who Seattle? We blanked, but certainly no worries. If you reach out, we can identify who that is for you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. We appreciate all of you taking the time today to participate in the webinar, and a big thank you to the presenters. So we will make sure that the recording gets up, and for any other questions or comments, please do feel free to reach out to us directly. We thank you so much, and have a great